True crime mystery. Who killed Juliana Redding? The gas was on. A candle flickered dangerously close. Someone wanted this place to burn. But when firefighters arrived, the absolute horror wasn't an explosion. It was the lifeless body of Juliana Redding, strangled after what looked like a brutal fight for her life. Who did this? And why? This wasn't some random break-in gone wrong. Juliana, a 21-year-old aspiring actress, had connections. Dangerous ones. Her murder wasn't just violent, it was calculated. The scene reeked of someone trying to cover their tracks, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. How does a murder case with DNA evidence, motive, and an apparent suspect fall apart? And what about the man lurking in the background, a wealthy doctor with ties to Juliana and a history of making problems disappear? The story of Juliana Redding raises disturbing questions about justice, privilege, and whether some killers are simply beyond the reach of our legal system. What happened that night in Santa Monica, and why has justice remained so elusive? Juliana Redding grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where she attended Sal Point Catholic High School. She had a happy childhood, staying close to her family and sharing big dreams. She wanted to be a model but had an even bigger goal, to own a boutique one day. After high school, she moved to California, maintaining constant contact with her parents, Patricia and Greg. She called often, texted regularly, and even visited Tucson whenever possible. By 2008, she lived alone in a bungalow and studied at Santa Monica College. To support herself, she worked as a restaurant hostess while chasing opportunities in modeling and acting. On March 15th, she spent the day playing golf, then headed home to unwind with her favorite show, Seinfeld. It seemed like just another quiet night, but the next day, something was off. Her neighbors noticed her dog inside the house, but Juliana was nowhere to be found. The place looked empty. When Patricia tried calling, there was no answer. Perhaps she was busy, or maybe she hadn't checked her phone. But as hours passed, the silence became unbearable. By evening, Patricia knew this wasn't normal. Juliana never ignored her calls. At 6 p.m., panic turned to dread, so she picked up the phone and called the police. Patricia contacted investigators, worried that something was wrong. Juliana wasn't answering her calls, and now her neighbors said they hadn't seen her all day. Her dog was inside, but the house seemed deserted. Something wasn't right.
Asked police to come check on her in this small Santa Monica bungalow. When they finally got inside, they found her dead, lying in her bed. She'd been strangled.
Officers arrived at the bungalow and scanned the exterior. Nothing stood out. Her car was still in the driveway. She had to be home. But the silence inside told a different story. When they stepped in, an immediate sense of unease settled over them. A candle flickered near the entrance, its soft glow almost disguising the unmistakable scent of gas. The stove had been left on, unlit. One spark, and the entire place could have exploded. Moving cautiously, they searched the house. In the back bedroom, they found Juliana. She had been strangled. The struggle was obvious. Bruises, scratches, overturned furniture. DNA under her fingernails showed she had fought back, clawing at her attacker in a desperate attempt to survive. The setup was chilling. Whoever did this wanted to erase the crime. The gas, the candle. It wasn't just murder, it was a cover-up. But for some reason, the explosion never happened. Maybe the old pipes leaked too slowly. Maybe there wasn't enough buildup. Either way, the killer's plan had failed. Investigators pieced together the final moments. A call to 911 had been made, but it was never connected. Neighbors later recalled hearing noises the night before, a struggle, furniture scraping, muffled screams, but no one thought much of it. Forensics combed the scene, collecting DNA from the front door, Juliana's clothing, and her throat.
I can tell you in 18 years of prosecuting cases, I've never had this much DNA.
Meanwhile, detectives began digging into her life. Her father mentioned someone they should look into, a man named John Gilmore. Their relationship had been rocky, marked by violent outbursts. He had once kicked in her car door. Another time, he forced his way into her apartment. Now investigators had a lead, John Gilmore. His history with Juliana was turbulent, fights, breakups, and even violent outbursts. He had forced his way into her apartment before. He had kicked in her car door. If anyone had reason to harm her, it was him. Detectives wasted no time tracking him down. When they questioned him, he admitted he had stopped by Juliana's place on Sunday morning. He knocked. No answer. Her car was in the driveway, but the only sign of life inside was a candle flickering through the security gate. He claimed he didn't smell any gas. Then came the questions about their past arguments. He didn't deny them. He even admitted they had fought the night before she died. He had called to tell her he was going out with friends. She hung up on him. Later, she made her plans and he went to a house party miles away. Even while they were out, they had kept texting until 10 p.m. That's when her responses stopped. By morning, she still hadn't replied. He called, sent more messages. Nothing. That's why he went to her place, he explained. But when no one answered, he left. His story was solid, but police weren't taking his word for it. They pulled surveillance footage. At 9:45 p.m., he was seen at a convenience store. Later, he grabbed food from a Jack in the Box. Partygoers confirmed he was there between 9:45 and 10:15 p.m., the critical window when Juliana was attacked. Then came the real shocker. The DNA found in Juliana's apartment? It wasn't from a man. It belonged to a woman. Investigators now had a new mystery. Who was this woman? Was she a jealous friend? A romantic rival? Someone from her past? They started looking into the women in Juliana's life. One by one, they collected DNA samples. One by one, they ruled them out. There were no matches. There were no leads. Then a new name surfaced. Dr. Munir. He wasn't just another acquaintance. He was someone from her past, a connection that went back years. Juliana first met him in 2007 while working at a restaurant. Something about her must have caught his attention because he offered her a job as his medical assistant. It was a way out of restaurant work, a chance at better pay, and she didn't hesitate. But their relationship wouldn't stay professional for long. Before we continue, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It will help more people hear stories that matter, stories people are too scared to talk about. Down the line, Juliana had moved in with Munir. He showered her with expensive gifts, let her stay in his luxurious Beverly Hills home, and promised her a future without financial worries. At first, it must have seemed like a dream, but dreams can turn into traps. Munir's attention soon became suffocating. He wasn't just generous, he was obsessed. He talked about buying her an expensive car for her 21st birthday. Then he brought up marriage. He had plenty of money, but his spending habits were reckless. Jewelry, cars, women. He threw cash around without a second thought. The more he lavished her with gifts, the more Juliana began to feel uneasy. Maybe he had misread her feelings. Perhaps he had convinced himself of something that was never there. Either way, his behavior grew increasingly strange, and Juliana knew she had to get out. She made her decision. The relationship was over. She moved into a bungalow in Santa Monica, with her father covering the rent. Oddly enough, she and Munir parted on good terms. They even stayed in touch. One of her friends later recalled a trip to Las Vegas where Juliana, Munir, and a small group had gone to celebrate a birthday. On the surface, they were still friendly, but beneath that, something was off. Juliana's father had been digging into Munir's past. What he found was disturbing. Munir wasn't just a wealthy doctor with a taste for extravagance. He was married. His wife and 3 children lived in Lebanon. It was highly unlikely that they knew anything about Juliana. When she learned the truth, she was furious. She told Munir never to contact her again. But Munir wasn't the only one in the family's orbit. Juliana's father, Greg, was a pharmacist, and he had been working on a business deal with Munir. That deal never went through. Greg had started noticing red flags, things about Munir's business that didn't sit right. He suspected illegal activity and cut ties before it was too late. Then just 1 week later, Juliana was dead. Investigators couldn't ignore the timing. Munir's failed deal, Juliana's abrupt decision to cut him out of her life. But there was one problem. His DNA wasn't at the crime scene, and now he was gone. He had left the country. Given Munir's murky history with women, investigators turned their focus to those who had worked for him. They suspected the female DNA found at the crime scene could be linked to him, but they had nothing solid to back it up. Most of his former female employees had long since moved on, many unaware of Juliana's existence. But one name stood out: Kelly Sue Park, a 47-year-old real estate broker with an unusual connection to Munir. Over the course of 18 months, he funneled over $1 million into her accounts. That kind of money wasn't for a simple business arrangement. Investigators had no proof that Park was involved in the crime, but something was off. They needed her DNA, and they needed it without tipping her off. If she were connected, she might warn Munir, giving him even more time to disappear. So they watched and waited. Their patience paid off when she carelessly discarded a cigarette. That tiny piece of evidence was sent for analysis, and soon they had their answer. Her DNA was a perfect match for the samples found in Juliana's bungalow. Now there was no doubt. Park had been inside that apartment. She had been there when Juliana's life ended. Authorities wasted no time in arresting her. Munir, however, was still out of reach. Days after Park's arrest, he vanished. No trace, no explanation, just gone. All signs pointed to Lebanon, where he had family and likely the means to stay hidden. But one critical question remained unanswered. Why? Revenge seemed the obvious motive. Had Munir ordered the attack because Juliana cut him off? Or was it retaliation for his failed business deal with her father? One theory carried the most weight. Munir had wanted to pressure Greg into finalizing their deal. Park had been sent to scare Juliana, to make a point. But something went wrong. Juliana fought back, and the confrontation spiraled out of control. By the time it was over, there was no turning back. Later in court, prosecutors argued that Munir had offered Park a six-figure sum to carry out his plan. But was it intimidation gone wrong, or something far more sinister? As news of Park's arrest hit the media, the LA Times wasted no time exposing her past. She wasn't just a real estate broker. She was known for strong-arming anyone who stood in Munir's way. A bank manager who backed out of a deal? She made sure he regretted it. A client who missed payments? She delivered a warning that kept him up at night. It wasn't hard to believe she might have played a similar role in Juliana's case. Yet despite overwhelming evidence, Park pleaded not guilty to second-degree homicide. Her defense team insisted she and Juliana had never even met. The only thing linking them? Munir, who was conveniently outside the country. The prosecution had a different story. They were ready to argue that Park was Munir's enforcer, sent to intimidate Juliana, but things had spiraled out of control. However, before they could present this theory in court, the judge dismissed it. No solid proof tied Munir to the crime. The case would have to rest solely on the forensic evidence found at the scene. And there was plenty of it. Park's DNA was everywhere. On Juliana's clothing, the locks on the front door, the telephone, and most damning of all, on Juliana's throat. A fingerprint and a drop of blood found on a plate in the kitchen sink cemented the prosecution's case. Park had been inside that apartment. There was no reason for her to be there unless she was responsible for what happened that night. The forensic evidence painted a chilling picture. Juliana had been strangled, and Park's DNA on her throat made it clear who had done it. But getting a conviction would be far from easy. Park wasn't about to go down quietly. Her defense team had tricks up their sleeves, and they were ready to fight tooth and nail to keep her out of prison. Kelly Park's defense team presented an alternative theory that sought to cast doubt on the prosecution's claims. They argued that the circumstances surrounding the crime were uncertain due to the absence of eyewitnesses. Without clear details about what transpired on the night of the attack, they suggested that Park's DNA could have been transferred to the crime scene inadvertently. They explained that DNA transfer occurs when someone touches an item belonging to someone else. That item later appears at a crime scene, leading to an innocent person being wrongfully implicated. Another scenario they proposed involved Park possibly touching an object at a previous location, such as Munir's Beverly Hills home, where her DNA could have been transferred to the crime scene when the actual killer touched the same item. To bolster this argument, they pointed to a towel that Park had possibly used during a visit to Munir's house several months prior. The defense speculated that the killer, in an attempt to cover their tracks, may have used this towel to wipe away their fingerprints and DNA, inadvertently transferring Park's DNA in the process. Park's frequent visits to Munir's home were also noted, suggesting that she and Munir had a business relationship. Given that Juliana had lived in that house at one point, Park's DNA could have been unintentionally transferred to the bungalow where Juliana was attacked. When addressing Munir's involvement, the defense downplayed any notion of a personal vendetta as a motive for Juliana's murder. They argued that the failed business deal with Juliana's father didn't seem to provide a strong enough reason for Munir to order her death, nor did the end of the romantic relationship between him and Juliana. They contended that the large sums of money transferred from Munir to Park were legitimate business transactions and had no connection to illicit activities. On the other hand, the prosecution sought to establish that Munir had a far more sinister role in the crime.
Redding also told detectives that Ueda bragged to him about a female James Bond type who worked for him. Her name was Kelly Sue Park.
They pointed to his past boast about employing a woman who was the female equivalent of James Bond, implying that Park had been hired as an assassin. The prosecution argued that Munir had ample motive to arrange Juliana's murder, citing not only their failed business dealings, but also Park's previous work with him. As the trial progressed, the case grew more dramatic and bizarre, with each new revelation pushing the boundaries of what seemed believable. The prosecution also revealed new evidence that further implicated Park. Phone records showed that she had called Juliana's workplace just days before the attack. Even more damning, Park was found to have been outside Juliana's bungalow the night before the murder. Since the two women had never met, the only plausible reason for Park to contact Juliana or to stake out her apartment was to plan the assault. The prosecution's theory gained momentum when it was suggested that Park and Munir had been involved in a health insurance fraud scheme, which was still under investigation at the time of the trial. This only added to the growing connections between Park and Munir, painting a picture of a woman willing to do whatever it took to protect Munir's interests. The trial dragged on for several years and finally reached its conclusion in 2013. The lengthy legal battle had captured the public's attention, with the twists and turns of the case leaving many eager to see how it would end. The evidence against Park seemed overwhelming. Her DNA was found at the crime scene in multiple places, including on Juliana's clothes, the front door locks, and, most chillingly, on her throat. The forensic evidence suggested that Park had been the one to strangle Juliana, and her fingerprints and blood further tied her to the scene. Despite this, the defense held firm, denying Park's involvement in the crime and continuing to argue that the DNA was transferred innocently. They also challenged the theory that Munir had hired Park as an enforcer, emphasizing that no direct evidence existed to confirm it. Park's lawyers went to great lengths to discredit the prosecution's theory, leaving no stone unturned in their attempt to exonerate her. The courtroom drama escalated as the trial continued, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. The media closely followed every development, with outlets like the LA Times highlighting the bizarre and shocking details of the case. Every day seemed to bring a new revelation or twist that kept the public hooked. By the time the jury reached a verdict, the tension was palpable. The trial had lasted years, but the decision would come down to a single moment. The final verdict on Kelly Park's involvement in the murder of Juliana left everyone in suspense. After a lengthy trial, Kelly Sue Park was acquitted of all charges, much to the outrage of Juliana's family and friends in the courtroom. They shouted in disbelief, convinced that Park was guilty and something had gone wrong in the trial process. The verdict meant no one would be held accountable for Juliana's death, and Munir, the man most connected to the crime, would likely never face justice, as he was in Lebanon, a country without an extradition treaty with the U.S. Juliana's family expressed their heartbreak through a written statement, voicing their shock and sadness. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Park and Munir, the jury found them not guilty, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality that justice had not been served. Over time, Juliana's mother, Patricia, turned to art to cope with the loss. She used her daughter's room to paint, finding solace and a sense of connection through her work. Though still devastated, Patricia, having also overcome breast cancer, began to focus on the positives in her life, trying to heal in small, meaningful ways. Munir, having fled to Lebanon, maintained his innocence. Though arrested in 2015 in Germany for medical fraud, he was never charged and eventually disappeared again. Park, also involved in the fraud case, was arrested and later released on bail, again evading justice. Juliana's case remains unsolved, with her family continuing to struggle with the fact that both Park and Munir escaped accountability. The tragedy is a painful reminder that sometimes even the clearest evidence cannot secure a conviction, and justice is not always served. If you found this story as gripping as I did, Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime cases and fascinating stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened? Let's keep the conversation going. And remember, the truth often gets buried, but we're here to uncover it together. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.